welcome to the Never Let the World Speak show, episode 6. This episode is going to be a little bit different, something I haven't done before. It's going to be broken up into 2 parts. This is called 70 to a Nation, Part 1. I've been doing a study on, specifically on the life of Joseph recently in Genesis. And I think that the life of Joseph is a really great testimony of the faithfulness of God and how the blessing of God is irrevocable. Regardless of what people do or whatever the devil tries to do, he can't take the blessing of God off of someone. So I noticed some things about the blessing of God and how people react to it from the life of Joseph and the events that lead up to the life of Joseph, specifically with his father Jacob. So that's where the story starts. That's where I decided to start this study, was with a study of Jacob, then leading into Joseph and the time in Egypt. So Jacob was the son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham. Father Abraham. Our father in the faith. In Abraham, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. That's where Jacob comes from. And Jacob was Joseph's father. Jacob was sent by his father Isaac. There's a whole backstory to this that I didn't really get into with his brother Esau. And his brother Esau basically hated him and wanted to kill him. So through the conniving of his mother, Isaac sent Jacob away. And he sent Jacob to his uncle's house to find a wife. Like he literally sent Jacob to his uncle's house to pick one of his cousins to marry. It was a different time back then. And so it started with Isaac blessing him before he left in Genesis 28, verses 3 to 4. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be an assembly of peoples, and give you the blessing of Abraham to you and your descendants with you, that you may inherit the land in which you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham. The people of God knew that they were to be fruitful and multiply. They knew they were supposed to be blessed, and they expected to be blessed. They expected to walk in that blessing. Genesis 28, 13 to 14. This is the dream Jacob had about the ladder between heaven and earth, and the angels of God ascending and descending on this ladder from heaven to earth. Verse 13, and behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south, and in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I've spoken to you. So Jacob knew he had a destiny on his life. And he lived like it. He was successful and blessed. Jacob would later have his name changed to Israel. The first thing I notice about Jacob's life is that he had to deal with people with envy. The people closest to Jacob tried to manipulate him for their own gain. Laban, his father-in-law, was a total crook who ripped him off at every turn. And he just tried to leech all of the blessing of God out of Jacob that he could. Bible says Jacob met Rachel at the well, and she brought, and this is before he went to Laban, even knew he was there. Jacob met Rachel at the well because he had stopped at the well. She came to water the sheep. That's where he met her, and he told her who he was, and so she brought him to Laban's house, and he stayed there for a month. Then Laban asked him what his wages should be for staying to serve him and tend his flocks. Jacob loved Laban's daughter Rachel, and he wanted to marry her. So Jacob said he wanted to marry Rachel, and they negotiated how much work Jacob would do for Laban to have his daughter in marriage. So again, a different time where marriages were negotiated like contracts back then. Nobody even thought about love. So if I was agreeing to this, I would want my wife up front. But Genesis 29 verses 18 says, now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. That was the deal. He would work for him for 7 years, and then he could have the daughter. I would negotiate that in reverse if I was negotiating. I would even agree to a longer time period to have my wife right away, but that's just me, I guess. Genesis 29, verse 21. Then Jacob said to Laban, so 7 years have passed, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. So Laban called all the men together and made a feast. And now we're skipping down to Genesis 29, verses 23 to 26. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to Jacob. Not Rachel, Leah, his older daughter. Brought him to Jacob, and Jacob went into her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? And Laban said, it must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve me still another 7 years. So that's the kind of guy that Laban was. And Laban, I mean, some people are just like that their whole life. You know, they just can't ever give the kind of effort and commitment it takes to be blessed on their own, or to for example, in the case of money, to be prosperous, right? So they're always looking to somebody else to help them out, to give them some money. They're always borrowing off their mom or something, you know, because they can't discipline themselves, or they can't be bothered to put in the kind of effort it takes to be blessed enough to not have to do that. So they just see it as they either see it as something that's owed to them, or they see it as easier for them to just take it from somebody else, manipulate it out of somebody else. And so that's what Laban did here. And no doubt he was relying a little bit on, you know, hey, we're family, you know, we're family. Just you should do this for me because we're family. Really, what was going on here was Laban wanted to keep him around because he knew that he was blessed. And the Bible also says that Laban, later on, it says that Laban changed his wages 10 times. So Laban was just a complete loser. Like, you've heard of Ivan the Terrible. This is Laban the greaseball. He was doing it out of greed. It can be done for only one reason, what he did. If it was out of love for his daughter, then he would have told Jacob about the so-called rule 7 years ago when they agreed that he would marry Rachel. He was just a con man. If it was out of love for his daughter, like saying, oh, it's not right for me to give the younger before the older, that wouldn't be right. If that was the case, then he would have said that immediately. He wouldn't have said, sure. He agreed to Rachel right away, sure, because he knew that was a way he could manipulate Jacob. So most men, again, it was a very different time. I'm going to say that a lot in this first little bit here, but because that's not the way, obviously, that we do things today. And most men, to be honest, won't even ask the father or the parents of the daughter for their blessing. They'll just ask the daughter to marry him, and if she says yes, they're getting married. They don't even consider any kind of traditional sort of formality, if you want to call it a formality. I don't believe it is. I went and met with my father-in-law and asked him if I could marry his daughter before I asked my wife to marry me, because I think it's right. And I could certainly ask my mother-in-law too, you know, but I mean, not that it has to be just the father, but I think it's right. I think it's right that you get the blessing of the parents, but most people today young people today don't even consider it. But imagine if you were in this time as a man, you've made this deal. You've worked at this property, you've worked in the fields, you've worked around the one that you love for 7 years. You know, you see her maybe not every day, depending, maybe he was out in the field or whatever. The Bible says Rachel was a shepherdess as well, so maybe he was working side by side with her. I don't know. But you see her all the time, but you can't have her. Okay, she's going to be my wife 7 years, 7 years, 7 years. I mean, I don't know. People today would never wait that long, I don't think. But imagine you've worked 7 years for this one that you love, and then you find out that you married her sister. I got a few questions about this whole scenario. First, how must Leah have felt about all this? I mean, how was the culture in that time? What was going on in the culture of that time? I understand they didn't have electricity and stuff, but what was going on in the culture of that time that he slept with her on their wedding night and he didn't on the feast night? And I don't know, they obviously must not have had any kind of a formal ceremony for Rachel and Jacob, because that would have been done in a place where there was light around a fire or something. But how was the culture and what was going on in that culture at that time that he slept with her and he didn't realize who she was? Not that, I mean, he never slept with her before, of course, but he didn't know until the morning when he woke up beside her who she really was. And why didn't she say anything? Why didn't Leah say anything? And Laban's response is, well, don't worry, you could serve me another 7 years, and I'll give you the one that you really wanted in the first place. So he squeezed another 7 years out of Jacob, and living off of Jacob's blessing. And you see his true motivation later on in the story when Jacob, after Joseph is born, and Jacob says, I'm leaving, and Laban says, what do I got to do to keep you around? Because he said, Laban even said, I know that I've been blessed because you've been here. So I was confused. Back to the last verse there, where he says in verse 27, fulfill her week, and we'll give you this one also for your service, that you will serve me still another 7 years. I was really confused about that, because in the Bible, I've always seen a week is representative many times of 7 years. And then given that he served 7 years for Rachel to begin with already, and then got Leah instead, he says, fulfill her week. I read that and assumed that meant serve me another 7 years, and I'll give you Rachel as well. But in doing some study on that, I know that many times it does say, it does mean 7 years, but it wasn't making sense to me, because I was thinking about like later on when Leah started having children, it just didn't make any sense. I've always read this story, and you read how Leah started having kids and Rachel was barren. Okay, so he's married to Leah now. He's not married to Rachel yet, and he's supposed to fulfill another week to get Rachel. And so how is it then that Leah starts having all these kids? She has 6 sons, and Rachel is barren. And Rachel, I mean, of course, they're sisters too, so imagine the dynamic there. But it read to me that if he didn't get Rachel for another 7 years, then it read to me that either they didn't start having kids until after Jacob married Rachel, which is unlikely, because it says, I mean, on their wedding night he went into her, so they were having sex, of course, and so it was very unlikely, and I knew that wasn't right, or it meant that maybe Jacob started having sex with Rachel before they were married, which is also very unlikely. I mean, in that culture especially. But the week, after studying it out, the week is actually a 7-day period that was the marriage feast, which makes everything make sense in this to me. Strong's Concordance says the word used for week in verse 26 means week's celebration. So Jacob married Leah, and then they had a week-long marriage feast. And then after that marriage feast, he married Rachel. And then he had to serve, so he kind of got Rachel on credit a little bit, because he had to serve Laban for another 7 years because he'd been given Rachel, who was supposed to be rightfully his to begin with. The two maidservants that are given to the daughters, Zilpah for Leah and Bilhah for Rachel, were also part of the marital contracts of the time. Like, people were property. This guy used his children, his daughters, as property. And the maidservants, I mean, how does that even, I don't know, they were born into his house through other servants or whatever, and they became maidservants in his house, and they were property. He'd say, well, I'll give you this one, I'll give you that one. And that's how Laban spoke about his own daughters. He said, finish her, fulfill her week, and I'll give you this other one also. Like, such a different time. I mean, I don't get it, but that's how it was. So that Laban, this guy was really, really slippery. He was the kind of guy, if he shook his hand, you had to make sure you get all your fingers back. So Leah is having all these kids, and Rachel is barren. Genesis 30, verses 22 to 24. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph. And here's where the story of Joseph begins. And she said, the Lord shall add to me another son. So we're going to fast forward now to when Joseph is older. That's all the lead up to Joseph coming out, coming into the story. And then the next record in the Bible of Joseph is when he's 17 years old. Genesis 37, verses 1 to 11. And the second thing I notice about, we're going to talk about right now, is that went on in this story and in this family, and that Joseph had to deal with a lot, was hate. People hated his own family. They hated Joseph for being blessed. They couldn't manipulate Joseph the way Laban did to Jacob, so they hated him. And this still happens all the time today, especially if you talk about being like a man or a woman of destiny. I have a destiny on my life, or God has a special calling on me, or whatever. If you talk like that, people even close to you will hate you for it. And then again, you think about the children of Israel. His name was changed to Israel, Jacob, and he had children through Leah first. And then when Rachel was barren, she said, give me children or I die. I'm going to die if you don't give me children. Because in that time, for a woman to be barren was like the worst thing. It was a social like train wreck, social suicide if you were barren and you couldn't have kids. It was basically, they used it like a judgment, like God's judging you because you're wicked or whatever, or your family's wicked, and so God's judging you and you can't have kids. So Rachel did what Abraham did when he had an Ishmael. She said to Jacob, take my maidservant Bilhah, and I'll give it to you as wife, and go into her, so that I might have children on my knees. That I might have a child on my knees. So first kids were had through Leah. When Rachel was barren, she gave her maidservant Bilhah. Then Rachel ended up having Joseph. After that, Leah stopped bearing, and then so she got uptight about the fact that she wasn't having any more kids, so she gave her maid to Jacob and said, have children for me. And they were still totally looked at as property. Like, the maidservant would have these kids, and they would be the children of, like, the mistress or the owner or whatever you call them, Leah, not the maidservant. So she has some children for Leah, and then Leah bears again, and then Rachel bears again in the end. So he had children by 4 different wives, and he only ever, the Bible says that he wanted Rachel. Leah, the reason Leah wanted to have so many kids was because she thought that it would endear her to her husband, like her husband would love her, because he didn't love her. He didn't want her. He wanted her sister. And so she spent a lot of her life trying to make herself worthy in her husband's eyes. So all of that to say this, Four different wives had children by Jacob. There's 12 boys. Bible lists one girl, Dinah, and I assume there probably was some other girls and stuff. I don't know why only the one, but I think because there's a story later where she was attacked and the boys wanted to defend her or wanted to avenge her, and they did. But at any rate, what I'm getting at is that Jacob had children by 4 different wives, but Rachel was the one that he loved. And the 2 children of Rachel were special, especially Joseph. He was the firstborn of his favorite wife, which is an odd thing to say, but firstborn of his favorite wife. So he had a special favor in the eyes of his father that would have led to the envy, that the same kind of envy that Jacob had to deal with Laban. And then it also ended up leading to hate, because you can imagine that the rest of the boys would be thinking like, oh yeah, he's special because of how he's born or whatever. Sort of like the way people tend to hate people that are born into rich families, for example. You look down on them and think, that guy didn't do anything to ever earn what he's got. I mean, he's just a spoiled little rich kid. And really, it's kind of, it's all rooted in envy, basically. I wish I had what he's got. So we're in Genesis 37, and Joseph is 17 years old. That's the next record in the Bible of Joseph. And there's several reasons in here why Joseph's brothers hated him. Now, Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, and the sons of Zilpah. So those are the sons of the maid. So remember, he's the special firstborn of the favorite wife, and the other guys are just the sons of the maids. His father's wives, Leah and Rachel's handmaids. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. So I don't know what happened, but Joseph told on them for something, or, said that they were, I think of my kids, somebody's always walking in to say, Ezra was mean to me, or Abigail just hit me, or whatever. Somebody's always coming in to tell on the other at this age. So now he's 17. His brothers were all older than him. There's only one younger than Joseph, I believe, and that was Benjamin, who was way younger. So he wasn't there. He was too young, right? They brought a bad report of them to his father. So that's reason number one. They spoke ill of them to his father, and that no doubt would have brought some problems for the boys from dad. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his other children because he was the son of his old age. Reason number two. They hated him for that because he was special. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. Reason number 3. So he was treated as special. He's preferential treatment. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. So there's 3 solid reasons in there for really why. But they all are connected to that last statement. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him. All of those things are connected to that last statement. He loved Joseph more than the rest of them. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." And his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" There's another reason they hated him. Reason number 5. So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowed down to me." So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream that you've dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you. Reason number 6. And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. His father, Jacob, knew that Joseph had a great destiny on his life. So I think, obviously the sun and the moon were representative of Jacob and Rachel. And then the 11 stars were his brothers. But Jacob did know that Joseph had a great destiny on his life. So in dream number 1, Joseph had a prophetic dream that his brothers would bow down to him and he would be an authority over them. In dream number 2, Joseph had a dream that his whole family would bow down to him and he'd be an authority over them. This would have been offensive to everybody probably except Benjamin because of his age. It doesn't record anything about him in this part of the story. His brothers hated him for thinking that he would be more than them. They hated him for daring to think that he could be something big. Now I know that Joseph didn't use a whole ton of wisdom in sharing these dreams. I'm sure that he knew what they meant and he discerned what was going on, but he just kind of should have kept his mouth shut, really. But familiarity breeds contempt, as the saying goes. It's a fatal mistake to share your dreams with the wrong people. Many people will allow other people's opinions or the things that they say about their dreams to determine how high they'll go. You share a dream with somebody and you say, I think I'm going to be a musician or I'm going to be a whatever it is. I mean, usually it's a dream because it's big and it's something that you aren't currently walking in and maybe you don't know how you ever could. And you share that with the wrong people and they're going to say, nobody ever makes it in that business. And, you really should be careful. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and all that kind of stuff. And it's just dumb things that people say because they can't comprehend how you say somebody that they know could actually be that, Look at all the famous people, the famous musicians, for example. I mean, let's take Taylor Swift, for example. I liked actually her old stuff, her original stuff, country stuff, and then she went all wingy. But she was just a kid in high school at one point, or a kid in elementary school at one point, and I'm sure that she was trying to work. She had that dream her whole life. I mean, I've seen some stuff about her where she had that dream her whole life, and she was working on it a long time. But if you let your little friends in grade 7 tell you can't make it and pull back because of that, maybe she wouldn't be where she is today. Sometimes you have to hide things like that in your heart, or be very careful about who you talk to about it. And you can't really let the whole world know about some of this stuff until you're ready to be able to withstand that kind of negativity that comes against you. Until you're so sold on what you're doing and where God's taking you that when those people say that stuff, you can just say, yeah, okay, well, whatever, thanks for your advice, and move on, and it doesn't really faze you. Until then, you kind of have to hide that in your heart, and I think Joseph should have maybe tried to do that here, but you can't allow other people to determine how big your dreams are going to be. Otherwise, you're just going to be a regular Joe your whole life and not achieve anything great. And if that's what you're trying to do is achieve something great, then you need to learn to not listen to other people. I found that in my own life many times. And that's not to say that I'm doing something great. I know that people's lack of depth in vision for their own life will often lead them to tell you that you can't achieve something great with yours. And you have to guard against that. Jesus went through the same thing with his own family and his own hometown. I mean, if he had to deal with this, you have to deal with it. I have to deal with it. If you're ever going to reach above the heads of others, you're going to have to deal with it. So the next thing that happened, and it is a common thread, Joseph's brothers, they found their opportunity and they attacked. Number 3 is that they attacked. In our society, this usually happens not in a physical way most of the time, but it happens in a form of gossip or just saying stuff that's not true about you, like lies or attacks on social media. They try to damage your reputation. Like, think of the backstabbing that goes on think of any reality TV for one. Big Brother or whatever, that show, that waste of time is totally built on this very thing. But the corporate world, look at the corporate world. The idea you're climbing the corporate ladder, you're usually stepping on the hands or the heads of others to get to the top. And then you have to, from the top, you have to sort of fend off all the attacks of people that are trying to take your head off. It's part of human nature, and it's a big problem that anybody that tries to rise above what we consider in our North American society to be normal will have to deal with. People will try to knock you down or try to pull you down, So they looked for their opportunity to strike, and they found it in Genesis 37, verses 18 to 28. Jacob had sent Joseph and said, "Go find your brothers and see how they're doing. They're out there with the flock. Go find them." So he's on the way. He has to walk around for a while, and he finds a guy that says, "Oh yeah, your brothers went to Dothan." So he heads over there, and Genesis 37 verse 18 will pick it up. Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near him, they conspired against him to kill him, his brothers. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Oh, look, here's this guy who thinks he's going to be something. Look, here's this guy who thinks he's going to be he's going to be rich, or he's going to be a country star, or here's this guy who thinks he's going to be a preacher. Here's this guy who thinks he's better than us." That's what they're saying. This dreamer is coming. "Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. And we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams." Let's kill him so he could never achieve his dreams. Great plan. See, these are some people that had no dreams whatsoever. That's how these kids sound. They're men. They were men. But Reuben heard it. There was one guy in there that wasn't quite such a wicked person. Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said, probably said, "What are you guys talking about? Really? Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into a pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him." And he said that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So he tried to find a way out of the situation and said, "Just throw him, don't kill him, just throw him in a pit, teach him a lesson, and we'll leave." And then his plan was that he's going to come back later, pull him out of the pit, take him back to his father, and save his life. So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped him of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. They stripped him of what his father had given him that was special. And then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. So they threw him in an old well. I have a well on my property. It's 17 feet deep. Now, I've seen selling acreages and stuff. I've seen wells that were 200 feet deep. But it probably wasn't that deep. It probably was something like the well on my property, 17 feet deep, 20 feet deep, whatever. If you threw him down a well that was 60 feet deep, he undoubtedly would have had broken legs and been a real mess. But if they threw him down a pit that was like mine, 17 feet deep and dry in the bottom, he would have been okay. So now he's stuck in there. He can't get out. If I fell into the bottom of my well, I wouldn't be able to get out. Mine's concrete encased. It's not earth like that one would have been, but you wouldn't be able to get out because you'd be digging it. When you try to dig holes into the earth to put your feet in or whatever, it would just kind of crumble. So he was stuck in there. And they sat down. So they threw him into the well, and they sat down to eat a meal. Then, these guys, the nerve of these guys. How do you get there? Again, I know it was a different culture and a different time. And it was common for, life wasn't as valuable back then as it is now. But this is just brutal. And these are his brothers. So they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, And there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "Hey, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by. I don't know why it says that and why it mentions that. It says Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled up Joseph and lifted him up out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites. So anyway, whatever. They sold him to the Ishmaelites. Now Ishmaelites are the descendants of Ishmael, who was Abraham's son, who Abraham had with Hagar, who was Sarah's handmaiden, because Sarah was barren. So she said, "Take my handmaiden Hagar and have children with her, so that I might have children." But then when Isaac was born, she hated Ishmael, and she said, get this woman and her kid out of here." And so that's the descendants. That's where his descendants, the Ishmaelites, came from. And you see a similar way of life here among this family. Abraham did that with Sarah, and then Jacob ended up doing the same thing with his wives, having children with their handmaidens. So they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Gee, thanks, bros. Number 4 is the cover-up. The next order of business was to cover up their sin so their father wouldn't find out. Genesis 37, 31 to 33. So they took Joseph's tunic, killed the kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in blood. Then they set the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" They knew, obviously. Everybody knew. And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." So the stages of this was, they started with envy, which Jacob dealt with Laban. But the brothers started with envy. They envied him because Jacob loved him more than anyone else. Then they hated him after that. And their envy turned to hate. Then they looked for a way to hurt him. And when they had done that, and they, of course, then they looked for a way to profit off of hurting him, and they did. But when they'd done that, they moved on to number 4, which is to cover it up. They plotted to kill their brother. Then they decided to leave him for dead in a well. And then they finally settled on selling him to make some money. You can't have a right heart and do this kind of thing. Their blind hatred for their own brother made them sink almost as low as you could possibly sink. But God saved Joseph through Reuben and Judah. Reuben told them not to throw him into the pit, and he intended to go back later and rescue him. Judah told them to sell him to the Ishmaelite traders. Now, I don't think Judah did that out of a right heart. I think Judah saw a way to make some dough. But it still saved his life. If they would have just walked away, let's say that they walked away and left him in the well, and Reuben ended up not being able to go back for him for some reason. Maybe Reuben gets killed. Gets run over by a camel or something and gets killed. And now the other brothers weren't going back for him. They weren't going to have a change of heart. Their hearts were wicked. So the only opportunity would have been Reuben. And if Reuben couldn't go back, he would have died. But either way, God saved him. God made a way of escape for him. And it looked like all was lost. Okay, I'll walk away with my life, but I've been sold now into slavery in Egypt, in a foreign country. I don't know if he'd even been to Egypt before. Think about that. I mean, imagine what he must have been feeling. He probably had no idea what to even expect when he got there. And he's now in the hands of Ishmaelites, which probably hate the children of Israel because their grandfather had cast them out into the wilderness with their mother. So they probably weren't being super kind to him. Probably weren't feeding him all that much on the journey. He was going through some hard times. The same, but this is the whole point of this study, up to this point anyway, just because this is like, I broke this into like kind of two halves, because this is the real negative half in Joseph's life. And then you're going to see in the next part what God does in his life. But you see these four stages, basically. This is part of the human nature and the kind of human condition of the human heart, of what people do when they have this in their heart, and when they're basically following their feelings. I mean, if you follow your anger long enough, it'll lead you to do some really bad things, and think some really bad things, plan some really bad things. And that's what they did here. But look at David. David with Bathsheba. If you now take these stages, and you take the stages that they went through here, and you take that and you apply it to David with Bathsheba, it's very similar. He didn't hate her, of course, but David saw her. First he saw her. Joseph's brothers saw that he was loved, and they weren't loved as much. So then he wanted her. David wanted her. Joseph's brothers hated him. So then back to David. David took her. Even though there's a whole story behind that, and David was supposed to be off at war, and if he'd have been off doing what he was supposed to do, he knew he wouldn't have sinned. But he saw her, he coveted her, which was a sin. And then he took her, which is a sin. Of course, coveting your neighbor's wife, and adultery. And then the next thing he did was he had her husband killed to cover it up. It's wickedness in the heart of man. Like these guys, they couldn't have what they wanted from their father, so they decided to take it out on the brother who did have the blessing, the love. And it took them all the way to the place of having no value for his life, seeing more value in getting some money for him than in his life as their brother. They just wanted him gone because of wickedness in the heart of man. This is why we need a Savior. Left to your own, I'm not saying everybody goes to this level, but to a certain extent, people do slide down with the right circumstances. People will do terrible things, and you can't save yourself, because it requires a sinless sacrifice. God set things up that you have to. In the Old Testament, you had to bring in an animal to be the sacrifice for your sin, and that blood had to be shed. But when Jesus came and shed his blood on the cross, he shed his blood for the whole world, because it was sinless blood, sinless, perfect blood that came from a perfect life, a life without sin. And when I read these stories in the Bible, like a lot of the things in the Bible that record terrible things that people have done, and that just shows you the need that humanity has for a Savior. Nobody's exempt from that. You may not go out and sell your brother, but you're still. I mean, even the things that go on within a person's heart and mind that don't ever come out of them, just go on inside of them, show you that we need a Savior. So that's part one. In part two, we're going to go through everything that God did for Joseph and through Joseph in Egypt. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. If you like the show, please share and follow so you get future episodes as soon as they come out. Until next time, walk humbly before your God and never let the world speak.